roll call or introductions, however you want to do it.
Yes, Mr. Peterson, I just started your recording as well.
Thank you.
So roll call, Mr. Peterson,
Present.
Ms. LaFrance,
Here.
Mr. Dunbar, I believe is going to be a little late. And then other assembly members that we have here, Ms. Allard
Here.
and Mr. Rivera.
Present.
All right, thank you.
Well, fantastic. So we'll start off, we'll go with some new business here. And the first item on the agenda is the State of Alaska's general obligation bond that they're considering putting creating a special election. Actually, the last information that I saw was the governor was thinking about having a special election to approve this GO bond this coming November, I would assume. But I don't believe that has been, it's not a certain thing at this point in time. So we'll see what happens with the legislature. I know that there was a number of projects that had already been put on a list. I think it was $350 million worth of projects the last time I had seen it. I actually didn't check to see if there was an update, a more recent update, updated list of projects. But we'll see what goes forward with that. Any members of the committee have additional information or questions about that? Go ahead, Mr. Rivera.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Two things. So first, during the roll call, it made it sound like I wasn't a member of this committee, and I just checked the page, and I am a member. So I don't know if that changes anything. But wanted to ask, just in general, how the assembly, and in particular our lobbyists, which I think in the future it would be great to have our lobbyists here, how are they working on this GO bond? I know that state legislators are considering making amendments to the GO bond or changing around some of the projects in the GO bond as the governor proposed. So I just wanted to get a sense of that process and if the assembly was going to play a part in that process.
Okay. Typically, when I was in the legislature, we did a GO bond, and I believe it was 2012. And so typically what they try to do is they try to get projects spread out across the state so that they can get buy-in from the legislators that live in those areas so that they can get enough votes to pass the program. And so I haven't looked at the list of projects to figure out which district each one is in, but typically that's something that is a goal. It's much easier to get enough votes to pass it if you have projects in a large number of districts across the state. But what our role here on the assembly is with getting items listed on the GO bond. We would probably have to work through our lobbyists or work through local legislative offices if we had specific items that we wanted to get listed on that bond that weren't currently listed. And the last time I checked, I actually didn't see anything about the Anchorage port on those bonds. And if we did put the port on there, it would probably be the largest item, well, depending on what we asked for, but it would probably be the largest item on there. And so on that, actually, I don't know whether that would be good or bad, because sometimes people around the state think that we in Anchorage can afford to do whatever we want to do, and that we don't need any financial help from anyone else. And So if there was a large item for Anchorage listed there, it might actually hurt the possible passage of the GO bond.
If I could just do a quick follow-up, Mr. Chair.
Sure, go ahead.
Thanks. So I guess for me, one of my biggest concerns is that the GO bond has, another Christian Health Associates type project on there. And so for me, it would be helpful if either from our lobbyists or from the administration, if we could just confirm that, we're not getting a present in the GO bond that we don't actually want.
And what group was that? You say Christian Health Associates?
Yeah, sorry if you didn't understand that reference. That was a reference to the project, the New Seward and the cut through at, I can't remember the name of the street, but it was a very contentious project that the Assembly took, what was it, like a couple years ago, and we finally got and we finally finished the acquisition of CHA recently. So I just want to make sure that we don't have something like that again.
Okay, yeah, that was a project that was put forward through AMATS that our members on the committee managed to postpone and were attempting to kill. So, but yeah, we definitely need to take a closer look at the list to so that we don't get any surprises. That makes perfect sense. Thank you, Mr. Rivera. Any other comments or questions on the GO bond?
Mr. Peterson, this is Ms. LaFrance.
Go ahead, Suzanne.
Thank you, Pete. I just wanted to mention that Mr. Weddleton and I have been working with the community in Girdwood to support the Three Bears Playhouse facility as a capital project, whether that would be funded through a GO bond or through potential coronavirus relief funds for capital projects. And not sure at this point which one, but we have had an initial conversation with the administration as well, and are working with a number of folks on that, including some members of the legislature. So I wanted to mention that and let the others on the committee and in the body know. Thanks.
Well, thank you. And I actually don't get down to Girdwood all that often. I'm not familiar with Three Bears or Little Bears. What type of facility is that?
It is a child care facility. It is run by a nonprofit, and child care is critical in general to a healthy economy, but also in this case to the local Girdwood community and I think the broader community of the municipality of Anchorage, because we have volunteer first responders in Girdwood who respond to accidents on the highway. And right now, there isn't enough childcare capacity to meet the needs of the community. And this is a public-private partnership with Alyeska as well. Given the fact that so many residents in Girdwood are employed in the service industry, there is definitely a need for affordable childcare to support those families.
Okay. Well, thank you for that explanation. Sounds like a great idea. The public-private partnership makes perfect sense in that situation. And so that we can see if that is something that we can try to get listed on the GO bonds, or at least make sure that some of the legislators are aware that there's a need there.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Ms. LaFrance. Anything else on? Oh, I see Jason has his hand up. Go ahead, Mr. Blockenstadt.
Yeah, I was just going to comment on a few related items, probably more related to the previous comment from Felix. Currently, within the GeoBond, there are only 4 projects in there that actually impact or touch Anchorage at all. There is potentially $2 million for Anchorage on wayfinding and connecting Anchorage's entire trail system. That's part of a larger kind of Fairbanks to Seward multi-use recreation trail construction project. That is one. Another is $1 million that would leverage, I believe, about $10 million of federal funds to improve the surface and rail bed at the Anton Anderson Memorial Tunnel that runs into Whittier. And then there are 2 UAA projects, a building energy performance upgrade, and then there is a combined heat and power energy savings project also for their integrated sciences building. So outside of that, there are no other projects either on the construction, maintenance, or others. So to answer your question, at least as it's currently constituted, there would be no additional projects that would lead to some of the issues that we've experienced under that interchange on the Seward Highway. The second thing that I will add, just so folks know, the area that, or the idea that I had passed to Assemblymember LaFrance and Weddleton in regards to Little Bears is related specifically to funds that will be coming to the state from the American Rescue Plan. The state is estimated to receive about $112 million for what is considered a capital projects fund. And there are some criteria. Basically, it has to be used to kind of help with either allowing more people to return to work or work remotely, or some sort of medical or other function as it relates to COVID. So there's $112 million statewide that will be coming, and I had thrown that out as an idea that maybe they could ask the legislature to fund that project through this new fund. So that's completely separate from this GeoBond project, and I have no idea what process the legislature or the governor's office will take to try to make decisions on which projects would qualify there.
Okay, great. Thanks for that. Appreciate the update. Any additional information or questions about the state geo bond? Not seeing any. Let's go to our next item, which would be SB 15. And this is a bill that would put a $1,000 fine on violations for the Open Meetings Act. And I called in to testify against that last week. And so did members from the administration. Our ombudsman sent in or called in and testified against that as well. I had the written testimony sent to the members so they would get a chance to review that. And we'll see what happens with that. Since I haven't been in the legislature for a while and don't know all the personalities as well as I used to, not sure exactly what the chances are of this passing the Senate, but I'm relatively certain that they're going to have a very difficult time getting it passed through the House side. And the testimony that we gave, I thought was pretty compelling. And one of the points that I believe we all made was this would put a damper on and make it really challenging to find people that wanted to serve on boards and commissions, because if you're just doing that as a volunteer and somehow the Open Meetings Act gets violated, even due to no fault of that particular person's, they could end up getting fined $1,000. And so I think we already have a hard time filling positions on these boards and commissions. So I think that would make it even more difficult to find people to volunteer for those. And Ms. Allard.
Thank you, Pete. I didn't testify only because as a sitting official, I wasn't really sure, and I wish I had. I will next time. But I think that the elected officials and people on boards and commissions should be held accountable. So I'm going to just go on record saying that I believe this should pass, and I hope it does. Over the course of the past year, I think it's important that we allow people to testify and be able to continue to do that. But I would like to hear your take on it just a little bit. You sound like you disagreed with it, and you did make a valid point in regards to it could discourage folks who want to volunteer. And can you go a little further on that, just so I can kind of more understand where you're coming from?
Well, on top of making it more difficult to fill positions in boards and commissions, there are times when, and I actually gave them a personal experience that I had about, it was less than a year after I was first elected. And when I was in the legislature, we had, the legislature had opted themselves out of the Open Meetings Act requirements. And so coming from the legislature to the assembly was a little bit of a learning curve, because all of a sudden, when I was in the legislature, my work consisted of going and making appointments with other legislators, going to their offices and trying to convince them to support my amendments or bills. And so there was no limit in who I could talk to. And then when elected to the assembly, you couldn't talk to more than 2 other assembly members about anything. So it was very, very limiting to go from having, basically total freedom to communicate with whoever you wanted to being limited to only speaking with 2 other members. And there are a lot of events back when we used to attend things in person around town. You could, even going out to lunch. One time I went out with my colleague from East Anchorage, Paul Honeman, after one of our work sessions. And we were ordering lunch, and had I not looked up at the right moment, there were 2 other assembly members that had walked in and were going to be seated in a totally different section. And I would not have even seen them walk in. And so there would have been 4 of us in there. And if this law had been in effect back then, there was the potential for a $1,000 fine for each of us for doing that. And the clerk's office does the best they can to try to get all the meetings noticed so that the Open Meetings Act isn't violated, but it's impossible for them to know where all 11 of us are going to be at any one particular time. So, that, I guess, basically is my position on this.
Thank you, Pete.
Go ahead, Ms. Allard. Did you have anything additional to say, Ms. Allard?
No, I just was trying to get a different perspective. I'm always, obviously I'm in favor for it, but nope. I just wanted to hear, it enlightened me, and I appreciate your opinion. Thank you, Pete.
Okay. Thank you, Ms. Allard. Any other questions or comments about SB 15? Oh, by the way, they limited our testimony to 2 minutes, and which was actually pretty good because I was able to get mine completely in there. And I see you, Felix. You'll be next. And but the other testimony was probably a little longer. I know the legal department probably had 4 or 5 minutes worth of testimony, so they were only able to get about half of theirs read off before their time ran out. Okay, Mr. Rivera, you're up.
Thanks so much, Mr. Chair. Yeah, no, I absolutely agree that we need to follow the Open Meetings Act, and huge kudos to the clerk's office. They do a fantastic job of considering all of the notice requirements, and really do a good job pushing back if they think something needs a little bit more notice. So big kudos to them. I will say the Assembly and the Municipality of Anchorage writ large does follow the Open Meetings Act. If we want to talk about accountability, there are currently 2 ways right now which members of the public can hold their elected officials accountable when it comes to Open Meetings Act. It is one of the grounds for recall, and in fact, we saw that some years ago. It was before my time in Anchorage, where I think it was 3 school board members were recalled because of a violation of the Open Meetings Act. Then there's, of course, due process in court. If members of the public feel that we are not abiding by the intent of the Open Meetings Act, they can sue us in court, and that's actually currently happening right now. So, yeah, I do feel like there are current accountability measures in place, and for me, I am absolutely opposed to the bill, and in particular, the potential for politicizing this issue by putting it in an understaffed agency, the Alaska Public Offices Commission. I think that is a horrible idea. So just wanted to put that on the record. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Rivera. Yeah, APOC, their budget has been cut to the bone, just like many other departments. And so it would be very challenging for them to have enough time for their personnel to follow up on some of the complaints that this bill might cause to be reported or filed. Any other questions or comments about SB 15?
Mr. Chair, Ms. LaFrance here, I have a question.
Ms. LaFrance, go ahead.
Thank you. So actually I have 2 questions, and forgive me, I have not gone through the bill yet. And the first one has to do with telephonic participation. And is it the intent of the bill then to not recognize telephonic participation as a method of a legitimate method of participating? And I don't know if you have the answer to that or someone could clarify. And then my second question is, do you know, and I know you have a unique position as someone who served in the legislature and serving locally as well, do you know if there is any effort among legislators to include state legislators in the Open Meetings Act? In terms of accountability, I think this is something that ought to be, considered and would potentially very much serve the public interest. So, issue of telephonic participation of the public, and then also if there's, any discussion about applying the Open Meetings Act to state legislators. Thanks.
Well, thanks for the question, Ms. LaFrance, and I'll take a stab at the second question. And I would be completely floored if the legislature voted to stop exempting themselves from the Open Meetings Act. I think that would take a miracle for that to happen. But as far as your first question, I see Ms. Vogel has her hand raised. Do you have any? Do you have an answer or an explanation for Ms. LaFrance's first question, Ms. Vogel?
Sure, through the chair. Assemblymember LaFrance, the bill does not do anything to change the telephonic participation rules which are currently allowed under the Open Meetings Act. So the testimony that was put out by my office, both written and verbal testimony, pointed out that the conduct that motivated the bill is quite different from the conduct actually penalized by the bill, and that, you know, there's this notion that it would fine individuals who are participating telephonically, but, you know, and as if it was something that was anti-transparency. That was sort of part of the sponsor statement when they talked about it. And at the same time that was true, I was testifying in front of the legislature over the phone. So we made the point that the Open Meetings Act is about full transparency, the public getting to see what their elected officials are doing and how they're making the decisions, having that reasonable ability to participate by calling in and by communicating either by phone or in writing, and that those were met in Anchorage over the summer. So yeah, this bill is, I think, misaligned with the feelings of individuals who did not like the pandemic precautions that the Anchorage Assembly had in place in August. And maybe are still opposed to the identical or more stringent precautions in place today at the legislature, but the bill itself does not actually change the telephonic rules.
Thank you, Ms. Vogel. Yeah, I actually remember when I first looked at this bill, it's not a long bill, it's less than a page. And so they weren't really getting into much details other than they were basically just adding the $1,000 fine. I just noticed that we've been joined by Mr. Dunbar. And we
Mr.
are.
Chair, may I just
You want to
briefly
follow up, Mr.
up?
Franz? Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. And thank you, Ms. Vogel, for that. I just wanted to mention that as far as telephonic participation goes, which, you know, I'm dialing in actually and not able to join the Teams meeting, is you know, as a parent and a member of the community also who has a full-time job and is serving on the assembly, I appreciate the flexibility that telephonic communication offers. And I know that we have heard from some members of the public who feel that, you know, in balancing their schedules for taking care of other people, whether, you know, children or family members, to be able to dial in and participate that way has opened up more participation. I understand the frustration. There are folks, you know, who you want to be there in person and express their opinion to us in the chambers, and I understand that. But I think, you know, as far as looking at the total picture of openness and participation, you know, telephonic options are really, I think they're really helpful. And then just to follow up on the legislators applying the Open Meeting Act to themselves, I guess and I know that's not necessarily the topic of this legislation, but I am curious. I think that, you know, when you are going to try to change rules for local communities, it maybe carries a little more weight too when you are willing to apply certain things to your own body. So I guess I would like to understand more why there's that exemption, and you know, I don't quite understand wanting to change things, but I think, you know, as Mr. Rivera pointed out, the clerk's office, you know, does so much to ensure that we are compliant, and there are community councils where there are 4 of us who attend, and I know those are noticed. So anyway, I have some lingering curiosity concerning the larger legislation, and thank you for the follow-up. Appreciate it.
Well, thank you, Mr. Franz. And, you know, I actually have not gone back to look at the history of when the Open Meetings Act was created, and to look and see, you know, what the legislators may have said when they were passing that, and why they decided to exempt themselves. I suppose that's something we might want to go back and look at to see the history of that, to get an understanding of why they did it and why it's still like that. Mr. Dunbar, do you have a question?
Yes, on this topic to Ms. Vogel, and I apologize, this might not be something that you have researched because I know this isn't your usual, where you do your work, but that exemption that exists for the legislature, is it the kind of thing that could be repealed through citizens initiative, through a ballot initiative? I know some things are appropriate for a ballot initiative, some things are not. Could that be removed by ballot initiative at the state level?
Through the chair, Assembly Member. Oh, sorry.
Thank you. Go ahead, Ms. Vogel.
Thank you. Sorry. Assembly Member Dunbar, you are correct that I have not researched this issue. I haven't thought about that question before. Off the top of my head, the exemptions for an initiative, include appropriations, certain health and safety measures, and this doesn't necessarily appear to be one of them, but it's because it's about the inner workings of a branch of government. I would certainly want to do some research into it before opining, and I haven't done that at this point.
Thank you, Ms. Vogel, and I would say I would not ask you to do that. That's something that if a private group was interested in, they should do it, but it doesn't seem like it's something that we should trouble the municipal attorney with. Thank you.
I see Mr. Gates has his hand up. Go ahead, Mr. Gates.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, I would just follow up on what Ms. Vogel just stated. I haven't researched this question either, but my instinct is that that would be an area that is subject to the initiative or referendum powers of the people. It's not, I strongly believe it's not within one of those areas that's exempted or unavailable for the initiative or referendum power. So we can look at that and come back to the committee next time if you wanted with a formal answer.
Okay, great. Well, thank you, Mr. Gates. Appreciate that. Do you have any additional follow-up on that question, Mr. Dunbar?
Oh, sorry. No, I guess my instruction to Dean as well would be, if it's easy to do it, but otherwise don't worry too much about that, because I don't think it's a initiative that would originate from this body. I think it would be a citizens initiative. I was just curious. Thank you.
All right. Okay. Thank you, Mr. Dunbar. Any other questions, comments on SB 15? If not, it looks like we'll move on down to the next item, which is the school bond debt reimbursement. And on the call that I had with AML yesterday, going over the American Relief Plan that passed, Niels Andreasen, the executive director of AML, said he thought that it would be appropriate or legal, allowed to use money from that fund to cover the school bond debt reimbursement. So that would be something, obviously, that the legislature would have to agree to. But I thought that was potentially a good sign that that funds might be able to be reappropriated from that money and used for the school bond debt reimbursement. Because, the average taxpayer is probably gonna, if they end up having to cover that here in Anchorage, it's gonna be probably an extra $500 for an average household on that. And so that could, and there's probably people that aren't aware of that. And so that could create some financial stress and hardships for numerous people. Anybody else have questions or comments about that? Mr. Rivera.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. So this doesn't have to be answered now. It could be answered either via email or a future meeting. But I'm just curious to see what our lobbyists are doing on this particular topic, because I think this is one where there, maybe I'm being naive, but there is hopefully a high probability that we can actually get this one done, and that the legislature will do it, because this isn't just an Anchorage issue, right? This is a statewide issue. So would be happy to hear to see if there's maybe a concerted effort with other lobbyists that other jurisdictions have hired or through AML to see if we can make this a reality. Thanks.
Yeah, that's, we've got a couple lobbyists that work for AML, and so we probably, if we had a legal, if we were sure that looking at the language in the federal bill allowed the state to use it for school bond debt reimbursement, then we could go from there and instruct our lobbyists to start lobbying for that to happen. So, but there is so much in that bill that I think it's going to be a while before we all are aware of what's all in there and what is going to be allowable and going forward. Because we had the call, the email call was over an hour yesterday, and we didn't really even get into the details very much. He was just listing, the items that were in the bill and how much each one of those, how many millions or billions it ended up being. And so it's a huge bill, over 600 pages, I believe. Any other questions or comments about the school bond debt reimbursement situation? Mr. Bockenstedt.
Yeah, I was just going to throw out there that, this is obviously a very important issue, and, we have, our lobbyists, focused on this issue in particular and trying to continue to get 100% of the school bond debt reimbursement, that is the state share, into the budget. Over the last several years, we've been successful on the legislative side. It has been just vetoed by the governor, and unfortunately there were not enough votes to override the veto. So we have been successful on the legislative side, at least on the early side. What I will say in regards to the funds that the state will be receiving, their eligible use of funds, or the allowable ways that they can use the funds, are going to be very similar to ours. There are some differences, but one of them is almost identical, and that is that you can use these funds for the provision of government services to the extent of the reduction in revenue of such state, territory, or tribal government due to the COVID-19 public health emergency relative to revenues collected in the most recent full fiscal year of the state, territory, or tribal government prior to the emergency. So I fully expect that if they wanted to, they could go back to last year and potentially, increase, and that will be certainly something that I will ask our lobbyists to, make an argument for, to include that, not just for us, and to the extent that they can work with others, either through AML or other communities that they work with, I will make that request as well.
Well, great. I really appreciate that. And, this is an issue, a statewide situation, and there are many other local governments around the state that may not be in a situation where they have the funding to pay for this, and the tax base may be very limited, or they may not have a tax base at all. And so this could create some serious hardships around the state. So I would think that this would be something that local officials around the state would be contacting their legislative representatives to let them know that they needed this financial help from the American Rescue Plan that was just recently passed. So, but yeah, if we can get our lobbyists to work on that, that would be fantastic. And anyone else have questions or comments about the school bond debt reimbursement? Okay, well, let's go down to the last item here. We have the new business, which is the legislative program. And since this is our first legislative committee meeting this year, I don't necessarily know if we actually have a legislative program that we've specifically established. I know the administration has the lobbyists down in Juneau. So I guess it's up to the committee if we want to create a legislative program and what that would be. Are you in the queue, Mr. Rivera?
Thank you. I was actually, thank you, Mr. Chair. I was wondering if actually Mr. Bockenstead, because I haven't had a chance to look up the legislative program in a while since we took a look at it. I think in November is typically when we take a first look at it, and then I think we formally approve it either at the start of session or before a session. So I'm wondering if someone from the administration, Mr. Bockenstead, or someone else could just walk us through some of the basics in the legislative program and where we are with meeting some of those goals outlined in the program.
Okay, Mr. Bockenstead? Or maybe go ahead, Mr. Gates.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, since we're talking about creating a legislative program or not, I just wanted to mention that we do have in our municipal code a section that directs that with the recommendations of the mayor, the assembly may adopt a legislative program by December 10th of each year. It's generally the timing designed to follow right after the approval of the budget and the capital improvement budget, so that appropriations from the state that are going to be requested in such a program could be requested. So be part of the legislative program. The code section is 21075. Actually, I said may, but it's a shall. It says 21075A. With the recommendations from the mayor and assembly members, the assembly by December 10th of the preceding year shall adopt a state legislative program for submission to the legislature and the governor. I guess that compliance might be in question in many past years. So I guess this is more of a sort of directory sort of ordinance rather than mandatory.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Gates. Well, I remember in previous years that before the legislators would head to Juneau, we would try to have the legislative program from the municipality put together and try to have a meeting with the legislators before they headed down there in the good old days back before the pandemic. But obviously that didn't happen this year. Any other questions or comments about a legislative program? I know that we were in the Ethics and Elections Committee, something that we had been talking about for the last year or so, was we wanted the legislature to take a look at whether a stamp was a thing of value or not. Because the way the statute reads now, it wouldn't be allowable for someone to give someone a stamp to put on their mail-in ballot. And at least I don't believe it would be. But I don't expect that that'll be anything that the legislature will be taking up this year. Matter of fact, there's even a bill that was filed in the Senate that I call the anti-vote by mail bill. Senator Shower was introduced a bill that he's trying to make it illegal for us to have vote by mail, the way I read the bill. Mr. Rivera.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. So I just, like I stated earlier, usually the legislative program is something that's incorporated into the November budget, and then we vote on it separately as a standalone item, typically before the legislature. I know Mr. Gates shared us December 10th, but I don't think that's a deadline that we typically follow. I think typically it's something that we pass in January or February. But I myself couldn't find a copy of the legislative program in the proposed 2021 budgets. So maybe I'm just looking in the wrong place. But for me, I think the legislative program provides a good foundation of topics to discuss in this committee and for us to get updates on as to whether we're actually making headway in Juneau on our legislative priorities, at least as outlined in the legislative program. So if that's something that the administration can send to us, if there was actually one that was put in as part of the November budget, that would be really helpful. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Rivera. And back in the good old days when the state had money, the legislative program was a series of requests for funding for projects, the majority of the time. And in recent years, since they've been having budget challenges, we've gone to more asking for legislation in certain areas instead of requesting large requests for funding. We can make requests for funding, but it was just unrealistic to expect that those requests would be fulfilled, since they were in this process of cutting huge amounts of money out of the budget from pretty much every area. So yeah, like I said, I didn't recall that we had passed a legislative program. So if we did, it would be a surprise to me. Any other questions or comments or information about a legislative program or the legislative program? Not seeing anyone. So the next item we have is administration comments. Is anyone still on this Teams meeting from the administration that wants to make a comment? I see Mr. Schuette's here. Do you have any comments, Mr. Schuette?
Through the chair, thank you. No, nothing further to add. For those who maybe aren't on their computer, I just wanted to let folks know that I gave a thumbs up to Assemblymember Rivera's request for a copy of the LEDGE program, which, much like you guys, I actually don't remember if we did one this year or not. It's been a heck of a year, but we will go back, we will uncover it, and we will deliver it. Thank you.
Okay, appreciate that, Chris. And anything else? Comments from the administration? Not seeing any. We will go to our audience participation. Any member of the audience wish to participate?
Hello?
Yes, is that
Hello?
you, Mr. Haberman?
Yes, I'll set my timer.
Okay, go ahead.
My name is Eugene Carl Haberman. I follow the public process. When the public process is done appropriately, decision made by the governing body is more likely the public interest. All I have is 108 seconds, so let me make a point. You discussed the bill before the legislature dealing with the Open Meetings Act. It's interesting you discussed it and your concerns about it. And my concerns is you continue to be non-compliant with the Open Meetings Law. And a good example is this very meeting, this legislative Assembly Committee on Legislature. There's no website for this committee on the mini page. There's no agenda for the public to see of this meeting. So the public is totally blinded to what's going on. And remind you also of a separate law that says provide a reasonable opportunity to public be heard. And that's not the Open Meetings, it's a separate law. But let's get to the point of this law, this proposal that's going on in the state legislature. It's interesting to note that they're pushing a proposal on the Open Meetings Law when the legislature is exempt from the Open Meetings Law. The first thing the legislature should do is to be included in the law of the Open Meetings Law, so and not exempt themselves. Whereas the Municipality of Anchorage and other municipalities have to comply with the Open Meetings Law that exists today, but the legislature doesn't have to comply with it because they've exempted themselves from it. And the second thing is a note to the Alaska Public Office Commission as the enforcer. Now, I followed the APOC for a number of years, and I witnessed scenarios where they give like sometimes 4-hour notice to their meetings, no place for public comment, and the reason for them doing that is so they can figure out what they want to say to the legislature for their particular body that is under review by the legislature. So they say forget the public, and they do that. So I'm really concerned that you got the foxcar and the henhouse scenario with APOC is not the party that should be involved, and I'm still patiently waiting from when the Municipality of Anchorage and other elected officials will comply with the Open Meetings Law, because they're far removed from complying with the existing law. And that's all I have to say with respect. And but note too is that you got a special meeting in Anchorage on Friday. I know it's a work session. You created a scenario where work sessions, well, we don't have to include the public except the people we want to hear from, but that's violating the law, providing a reasonable opportunity to public be heard, a separate state law that's not the Open Meetings Law. Thank you very much, and my time's up.
Thank you, Mr. Haberman. Any other individual interested in audience participation? If you are, I think it's *6 to unmute. Okay, I don't believe I see anyone, so I'll take a motion for adjournment.
Move to adjourn.
Okay, great. Thank you. Have a great afternoon.
Thanks, Pete.
Thanks.
Thanks, Suzanne.